moved to Egypt. Unfortunately, the Egyptians in time don't treat them with much hospitality. They make the Hebrew people slaves, and they are slaves for some 400 years till about, move over to here, about 1500 BC. And that's when God raises up Moses to lead the people, part the Red Sea, out of Egypt, and then eventually goes into the Promised Land under Joshua's leadership and hundreds of years of rule by the judges till you get right about in the middle of Old Testament history, and that is the time of David. People say, we want a king so we can be like others. And they have Saul, and that's kind of a disaster. But David comes. He's a great military leader. He conquers all the enemies of the Hebrew people, so there's a time of peace. And the one great passion of his life that it doesn't get to accomplish is building a temple for the Lord. That falls to his son, who takes the throne after him, whose name is Solomon. Solomon had lots of charisma. It was a peaceful time. The economy was booming, and he built a very beautiful temple. And this temple was so magnificent, people traveled from all over the world so they could see the structure that Solomon had built. After Solomon, the kings that followed, well, there was political divisions. They didn't have the same charisma, didn't have the same commitment to the Lord. More bad kings than good kings, and the Hebrew people in general, they fall away. They disobey God. They fail to trust Him. Sometimes they incorporate the practices of the pagans that come before them until you get to a very important year. We learn in Old Testament studies, worth writing down, by the way, 587 BC. In 587 BC, the Babylonian Empire, under the leadership of its emperor Nebuchadnezzar's, armies come in, defeat Jerusalem, destroy the temple, and take Hebrew people, tens and tens of thousands of Hebrews, into exile to live in Babylon. And among them are Ezekiel and Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And there they are in captivity for 50 years. And in 538 BC, the Babylonian Empire is defeated. The Persian Empire is the dominant power on earth. And their emperor, whose name is Cyrus, allows 50,000 Hebrew people to go back to Jerusalem. And just to let you know historically, that is very exceptional. Typically, when a nation, a people group's defeated, they're taken into exile, they just kind of assimilate into that new culture and they're lost as a people group. But the Hebrews are allowed. Most of them had been born in captivity. 50,000 of them go back. Among them, Haggai, Ezra, Nehemiah was in this part of the story too. And they get to go back, and they rightfully see it. God's giving us another chance. And so we want to do things right this time. So what's one of the first things they want to do? They want to rebuild the temple that had been destroyed. And so they begin the process of doing that. They lay the foundation. There's a great celebration. The young people are cheering. The old people are crying. But in time, the work is neglected, and all that's left is just the foundation. And it's in that context that God calls out the prophet Haggai, because the work in the temple had been neglected and idle for 14 years. Nothing had been going on for 14 years as far as building the temple, the house of the Lord. And Haggai's work is to say, it's time to relaunch. It's time to restart something. It's time to get something going again. Now, I'll give you a little principle there at the top of your outline. Says this: as a general rule, it's not an absolute rule, but it's a pretty good general rule. It's harder to relaunch something than to launch something. It just doesn't have the same passion and newness and enthusiasm when you kind of have to go back and get something going again. So there's part of the challenge that is faced for them, maybe also for us. Because I want to ask you to ask the question here: got any unfinished business in your life? Anything that's going on? If I walk through your garage, if I walk through your house, would I find some things that have laid idle for a while that need some attention? Any unfinished business that's there? And of course, we want to think about spiritual business. Anything going on in your spiritual walk or not going on that should be, that needs to be relaunched, need to get more faithful in Bible study, need to be more involved in missions and ministry, need to be engaged with the spiritual gifts. We have a Sunday school class, I know, that's studying spiritual gifts right now, that you need to utilize that unique giftedness that God has given. You've been laying idle. Some things to get launched or relaunched. We're going to look at these opening verses in Haggai's story, and we're going to find first some characteristics and then some principles that need to take place for there to be a relaunching. And hopefully here, ideally at the first of the year, it's a time to think, what do I need to get started or restarted in my life that may be absent and needed to do so? So let's walk through those together. The first is this: we need devotion. Devotion. The principle is the commitment to a project is related to the strength of a relationship. Now, we just came out of the Christmas season, so just kind of think about the highest expense and the biggest trouble you went to for somebody for Christmas. I kind of doubt it was for a perfect stranger. Certainly not for your enemies. But for somebody who was endeared to you, for your spouse, for your kids, for your grandkids, for your parents, somebody really close, your best friend, you went to a lot of trouble for them. That was because that devotion, the heart of the relationship that was there. Now notice what it says here in just the second verse in Haggai, that 2-chapter book in the Old Testament. This is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say the time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house. Not yet time yet. We started 14 years ago, but it's not yet there. And really we see something about the people, don't we? But I want you to notice some little nuance in here. I don't want to read too much into it, but I don't want to neglect it either. And you can underline it, where the Lord Almighty says, these people. Circle the word these people. Because most of the time, when God talks about the Hebrews, he talks about my people. My people. But here he's saying these people. Does it say something about the status, closeness, intimacy of their relationship? You know, it's kind of like as a parent, you go home and the other parent has had the kids and they're on their last nerve, and you walk in the door and the parent says to the other parent, just got home, "You'll not believe what your kids are up to, what your kids are doing." You kind of distance yourself in there. So we see here this that they haven't kept in an intimate, close relationship with them that would bring them to say something. It's not time yet. Now, one of the things I said last week in a sermon on time management, if you weren't here, is that, again, a general rule, not an absolute rule, but a good general rule, is you make time for the things that are important to you. You do, and you make time for the people that are important to you. And so by saying, it's not time yet, it's okay for God's house, for the temple to kind of sit there and just a foundation never get built. What are they saying about their devotion to the Lord? They're saying it's not important enough for them to invest the resources of their time. It's not, the devotion isn't there because the relationship isn't as important as it needs to be, as it should be. So it starts out by saying, where's the devotion and how do I show that? And let me take just a moment here, church, to talk about a small bit of unfinished business on our church agenda. You'll get some information in the mail and otherwise that 2018 was an exceptionally generous giving year for our church, and we are grateful for that. But one place we're still falling shy on was our Lottie Moon offering. To date, around $17,000 has been received toward that. We're going to leave the offering envelopes out a couple of weeks. And all I ask, and let a word to the wise prayerfully be sufficient, is search your heart and say, what does it say about my devotion? Because I've challenged and asked you to prayerfully consider a principle I've tried to follow in my life, that this is my Christmas gift to Jesus. And I wanted to show the importance of that relationship with me, and that it's even more important than the most dearest and nearest earthly relationships that I have. And so again, evaluate that. We'll leave the envelopes out for a couple weeks, and we'll see where that will take us, if you can. All right, so there's the word devotion. The next word is the word perseverance, and the principle is just because something is challenging doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. What kept them waiting for so long? Why had it been 14 years? They got back 50,000 of them from exile. They wanted to build the temple. They got started. They built the foundation. What took place? Well, we have to go to the book of Ezra to get a little bit of the backstory, and we find out that some of the people who were residents of the land before those in exiles came back didn't like the idea of the temple being rebuilt and discouraged it. The peoples around them set out to discourage the people of Judah and make them afraid to go on with the building. So there was this local intimidating factor that took place. They also sent word to the king of Persia, again, the dominant power over the world, and said, don't let them build that temple. If you'll go back and look, you'll see these Hebrews, they're just troublemakers and they're stubborn and they're not cooperative, and give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And so there is a word that comes from the Persian leadership to say, stop the work on the temple. And so it says there, in the chapter 4 of Ezra, thus the work on the house of God in Jerusalem came to a standstill. I know that these were obstacles that were formidable, were challenging, but just because something's challenging doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And we like this idea. I mean, I'm attracted to this idea too, that if God's in it, if God wants us to do it, the doors will open, the obstacles will fall out of the way, it'll be smooth and easy sailing all the way. We like that idea, and that's a sign that God must be in this because it's all falling into place. But that's, again, not an absolute rule. In fact, it may be that some of the hardships and the challenge are part of what God is doing to bring the work on the way He needs to and bring the work that He's doing in us to where it needs to be. And so we persevere. Just because something is difficult or obstacles arise or challenges to getting them finished doesn't mean, oh, you can stop and quit doing that. The principle of relaunching is always going to have that perseverance to overcome whatever it is that might stand in the way. The third word then is kind of related to it is wisdom. The principle is choose the hard right over the easy wrong. It wasn't really easy for them to quit. Well, that's kind of gotten tough, and so we have here the wisdom principle, the hard right, to stay with it. The easy thing was for them to stop and to quit among things. Quitting is always the easiest thing. That won't work, that won't take place. I'm just going to give up, and it's easier. And instead, it says they're going to work on their own places. The word of the Lord came to the prophet Haggai, is it time for yourselves to be living in paneled houses while this house, God's house, remains in ruins? They hadn't just sat on their hands for 14 years. They've been taking care of themselves, and in a way that was easier. They'll just take care of me, and I'll neglect God and His ways. That's easy. There are a lot of things that are easy at the front end instead of making the hard right choice that actually comes out better at the far end. It's easier. It's easier not to study when you're a student. Easier not to go to class, never to visit the library. It's easier than putting in the work at the beginning, but then the time comes when it becomes so much harder because you didn't. It's easier to eat junk food than it is to eat nutritious food, isn't it? It's easier to find, it's cheaper, tastes better. It's easy. But in the end, in the long run, it's a more difficult route you've chosen for yourself. It's easy to spend more money than you make, get underwater in debt, but in the end, it makes a much harder road for you to go down, right? So choose the hard right way as we go instead of the easy wrong way. So again, I'll salute you. You're here on 8:30 service and Sunday morning in January. You know, it's easy to sleep in this morning, wouldn't it? Would that have been hard for anybody? No. But you did something good. You got up and you got here. And it'd be easy to stay home tonight. But we got some great discipleship opportunities for you that if you'll come back this evening, it'll help you grow in your spiritual walk. We start up all of our Wednesday night activities this week for all age groups. I have Tuesday morning early risers Bible study starting back this week. All these things, you know, that's going to take a little effort to get into. And you say, boy, that's a big sacrifice. That's a big commitment. But as I said last week, Christianity's a big commitment. And so make some wisdom there in making the right choices that you're going to make. And don't make the mistake that the Hebrews were making at this time. They're putting their own comfort and their own welfare in front of the Lord. And pray, God, with your help, let me make wise decisions. Let me choose the right over the easy wrong. Next word is the word results. What's taking place now? How's it been going for 14 years? You're taking care of your own house, but you're neglecting God's house. You're taking care of your own affairs. You're neglecting God's affairs. How's that been going? Well, right devotion brings the right results. Notice the observation that Haggai makes. Now, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You've planted much, but harvest little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but you're not warm. You earn wages only to put them in a purse with holes in it. You could write beside that verse right there, you could just write frustration. Isn't that a formula for frustration? You've worked hard, and the income, the harvest doesn't seem to come. And what you drink isn't satisfying your thirst. What you eat's not filling. The clothes don't keep you warm. You cash your paycheck, and it's like you got holes in your pocket. You wonder where it went. You see, the primary relationship in your life isn't right. The verse we focused on last week was, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. What things did Jesus talking about? Your clothes, food on your table. Seek God's way first, and the results will tend to take care of themselves. Now, maybe it's in God's way they're taken care of and not the way we would like or prefer. But we do that in faith. We seek his way first, and that there will be the results and the satisfactions and the joys and fulfillments in life, and less of the frustrations that can take place, because we're seeking to find our place in God's work and God's will. And so, when you consider how you're going to use your resources, your finances, somebody asked me this week about tithing, so I told them my convictions on that. I believe that if you give 10% to the Lord, he'll make the 90% work it out. He'll supply what you need with the 90% that's left, better than if you kept the 100% to yourself. I really do believe that. I know a lot of you do too. I also believe the same principle works with time. Talked to a lot of folks who said, do you go to church? You in church? Oh, I don't have the time. And I wish I could somehow word it in a way that would be convincing to do that. If you give God the time that he needs, the people would say, it's not time yet. We don't have time yet to rebuild the temple. If you give God the time that he needs, I think he'll make the rest of the time work out to fill and take care of the things that you need. Will bring the right results that you want to have. And God's desire and his plan and stuff for us to do that, and that supply will be there. John Bunyan's primarily known as the writer of an analogy named Pilgrim's Progress, one of the classic writings in church history. But I like the little limerick that I put there on your outline too. It goes this way. A man there was, they called him mad. The more he gave, the more he had. I think that's part of the will and the working of God's resources in our life. We show the generosity, we give him the time, we show the devotion to him, we give into the Lord, and somehow in ways, I can't prove this, you take this by faith, but I thought of this and said you can't prove that the other way works either. You can't prove you give 100% and that comes out any better results. You take that by faith. So you don't prove it, just believe it in faith, show that devotion, and the results take care of themselves. And then the last thing is to get started. And I think the principle is the first step's the hardest one. You want to start an exercise routine, get better shape. The first step of running is the hardest one, not the last one. It's not the last push-up you do that's the hard one. It's the first one. It's just getting things started, getting things launched. In some ways, the challenge of getting things relaunched. And so God gives to Haggai instructions about this. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. Go up into the mountains, bring down timber, build my house so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored. He breaks it down into some steps, right? Go up to the mountains, cut the timber, build the house. Now, it's a lot more complicated than that, but he's starting to break it down into some steps. that you can manage and that you can handle as you get started. So last week we told you, there's something God wants you to do, some plan, purpose in his life, some new devotion, some next step or level, something he wants to launch in the new year. Write it on your calendar. Go get it on your calendar. When you're going to do it, when you're going to start. Write it down on your calendar. Make that that's a good start. Do you need any resources to do that? Then take care of getting those. That's another step in there. What time of block do you need to have? What are the things that you need to do to start taking care of things, to get things started, to go to work? And then to the conclusion then, I ask you this. What unfinished work is in your life? Same thing we had at the beginning. Do you have any unfinished work in your life? Anything God needs to start and to restart? Anything that you've neglected? Have you thought about over the last little bit? You know, one of the things like in the holidays, we're more generous. Generosity kind of goes with the holidays. Well, it doesn't have to stop with the holidays, does it? Maybe let that generosity spirit not fall into neglect, but let it continue on into the new year. And you don't have to look back that far or something that you need to launch and keep going. There may be those who say, you know, I know it's in God's will. I've kind of let it sit for years, 5 years, 10 years, 40. I need to be baptized. I've never made that public profession of faith the way the Bible describes it, the way Jesus set the example for me. And he left the instructions to take care of. I need to do that. I need to launch it. I need to take care of that. Some of you come to worship very faithfully, but you're not in a Bible study group. We're about to start a new Sunday school class today, and we're praying for that, and there's opportunities for you. So this would be let's get that launched into your life, or come to those discipleship classes tonight, or those other opportunities that we have. Or some say, I'm going to start being a generous person and obedient to the way and faithful the way God has blessed me. I'm going to go on that mission trip. I'm going to get engaged in ministry. I've got some spiritual gifts and abilities I know not everybody has, but I'm making somebody else do work that I should be doing. So I'm going to step up, and I'm going to let some things launch into my life, and let this be the time to do that. Look at these closing verses that we're going to see this morning and see what takes place there. It takes place for Haggai and his generation. It'll take place for us. Then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, gave this message of the Lord to the people. First he says, I am with you. Underline that. What needs relaunched in your life? What needs to be started in the new year? You're not going at it alone. God says, I am with you, declares the Lord. And then, so the Lord stirred up the Spirit. God's working. It's not all up to you. He's not an idle presence. He's stirring up some things in folks and folks around you. Stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah. So he was the political power. And the spirit of Joshua, son of Zodok, who the high priest, so he was the spiritual leader of the people. And the spirit of the whole remnant of the people. God went to work in folks' lives. They're willing to go, and God was willing to be with them and empower them. And then that last sentence, and they came and began to work on the house of the Lord Almighty, their God. The Lord Almighty, whose God? Their God. Remember what we said a moment ago? These people, now these people are saying their God. It's their God. The relationship had shored up. The relationship was healed, reconnected, gotten stronger. A new launch was taking place. And if you'll do that, if you'll say, it's not going to be business as usual, I'm not going to let some things in my life that God wants to happen continue to stay idle day after day, week after week, year after year. If you let this be a time with his powering spirit and help, say, just get started, just get going, get relaunched. Then, well, like those SpaceX rockets that go into outer space on their relaunch, you can go to new heights in your walk in ministry with the Lord. Now I'm going to ask you to bow your heads, close your eyes. It all begins with the decision, and we're going to sing as our invitation hymn, I have decided to follow Jesus. Maybe there's folks today, so there's a neglected part in my walk with the Lord. I've never been baptized. I've never become a formal part of this church. I've not been in a Bible study. I've not been in a discipleship group. I've not been doing as I should in generosity or being engaged in ministry, using the gifts of leadership that God has granted to me. Well, it begins the change, that new year, that new launch starts with the decision. And would you decide to follow Jesus? Heavenly Father, as New Year's before us, it's time to think about these new beginnings, to start and to restart some things in our life that would be according to your will. What a great way to start off the new year, our first morning in worship, our first worship time together. Say, I'm making this good decision that I need to make. And I know you'll be pleased with it, and know you'll be honored. And when you're honored, I'm honored, and I'm pleased too. In your name we pray. Amen. Stand with me if you will. If there's a decision, come to the altar at this time.
To follow Jesus, I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. Though none go with me, I still will follow. Though none go with me, I still will follow. Though none go with me, I still will follow. No turning back, no turning back. My cross I'll carry till I see Jesus. My cross I'll carry till I see Jesus. My cross I'll carry till I see Jesus. No turning back, no turning back.
Thank you. Be seated. And as I said, a great way to continue the first Lord's Day of the year is to be a part of our Bible study time. So I hope you'll consider adding to that hour to this time that we share together on the Lord's house this morning. The ushers are coming forward at this time. Pass those registration forms to the right or left so that those might be received. And again, just a reminder, it's all these things restarting, after the holiday break and schedule. So tonight, full schedule of these discipleship classes that are launched, Awana relaunching after taking some time off in December. On Wednesday night, we're back on full schedule with all of our children in preschool, sanctuary choir rehearsal, another thing that you might be ready to relaunch into your life or launch into it, being part of our worship ministry in that way. And so all kinds of opportunities. Early risers, again, Tuesday morning, you're welcome to join in that time together too. If you would now, one thing too, forgot to. Okay, I got worship notes. If you're looking for a notebook, I shared this last week, we got binders, so if you keep those outlines week to week in our worship times together and you like a place to collect them, just our gift to you here on the front pew, there's a few dozen, and you're just welcome to take one as long as you promise you'll use it. So if you'd like that, please do so. Now, if you'll stand with me, we have a new benediction this year coming from Revelation chapter 5, verse 13, as we share the honor and glory that goes to the Lord alone. So we're going to put this one to heart and to memory as we give him our praise. So say it with me, beginning with the reference. Revelation 5:13. To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever. Amen. You are dismissed.
would have been a little late.